Welcome to the Shared Path. I'm Maggie Linton. I met our next guest when he called and asked if he could be on my SiriusXM talk show to discuss depression, suicide, and overcoming the naysayers. Most recently, Stacey Young received his PhD. He's also founder and president of Socrates, saving our communities at risk through educational services, and Beyond SPRH LLC. Dr. Young is also an award winning educator, author, mental health advocate, and so much more, and especially being my friend. I'm so happy and pleased to welcome my friend, Dr. Stacey L. Young. Welcome, Sly.
Well, thank you very much. Now, what you say? What was that name you introduced me as?
Dr. Stacey L. Young. You know, I was there that day you said, "Come on, I'm it." And I was so happy for you. Um, but I don't, maybe I won't say where we end, but I want to begin with what brought you to me the first time. Some of the crises that you had gone through, but maybe even let's go back further and talk about your growing up because there was a lot going on there too, wasn't there?
Yeah, so I guess the best place to start is to introduce ourselves in the way that in which we were introduced. So sometimes we hear little voices or little things happen that we don't understand. And I actually have one of my cousins. Her name's Virginia Smith. And she had been driving around the country with her husband, who's a trucker. And she would say, I just came through your state. And I'm like, well, why are you telling me now that you're gone? I said, let me know when you're in my state. Even if you're close by, if I can make it to you, I will. So, based on that conversation, she actually came through Virginia and she called me and said, hey, can you come over? Um, I'm in this place called Falls Church. And I was like, oh, well, that's not too far. And then I said, you know what? I'm not in a good space right now because at that time I wasn't in a good mental health space. So I was just like, you know what? I'm not going to do it. But I hung up the phone and I heard a little voice that said, you need to call her. And I called her back and I said, you know what? You're here. I told you to call me. I'm going to come to you. And it was a great reunion because I always loved being around my cousin. And then when I got back, I just sort of reflected on it. And a couple of days later, she called me and she said, you know what? You need to be on SiriusXM. And she recommended another show. And that didn't work out. But I said, you know what? Let me start looking through the lineup of hosts at SiriusXM. And that's how I found you. And then I sent you my books. And probably about a week and a half later, you said, hey, we connected via phone call. You're like, hey, I'd love you to be on my show. And that was one of the best days of my life because it introduced me to a wonderful woman, Maggie Linton, who gave me my first break on commercial radio. And then after that, it led on to some other things that happened in a very positive way. So thank you for opening the door for me, Mag.
Oh, you're welcome. And it has truly been my pleasure. But I want to go back to your high school days when you had literally given up and we talk about the importance of teachers, and now you're one yourself. But let's talk about that day, that another one that changed your life.
Absolutely. So I wasn't a great student in high school, and it wasn't because I didn't have the talents or the ability to do well. I just wasn't connecting with the process that was used for teaching, which is primarily a very passive approach. Someone feeds information to you, you take notes, and then you regurgitate it. Well, I'm an active learner. I need to be engaged. I need to be involved. I need to utilize my mental capacity in the moment. And so that wasn't happening. And so I was disengaging, and it was interpreted as I didn't care, I didn't want to be there, I didn't have the ability to do well. So that led to my me failing 6 out of 7 classes in my sophomore year and missing over a third of the school year. And what happens when we sort of withdraw sometimes is we find those shiny objects that capture our attention. And I started hanging out with people that weren't wanting to necessarily excel, and they were skipping school. So I was skipping school with them. And that led to a parent teacher conference in which the principal said, Stacy isn't doing well. He's not a good student. This is not the right place for him. We think that he should leave and go get a job because he'll never do well here. And my mom at that moment said, this is your life, your decision. You make a choice. What you want to do right now. It's your decision to make, not mine. And that was the best thing that she could have done for me because she put the responsibility in my hands. Because a lot of times parents will say, this is what you're going to do, and I'm going to mandate this for you. And they don't have a conversation. And in that moment, my mother could have made the decision for me and said, "Your boy, you better get your butt back in class. You're going to do well." But she didn't say that because she said, this is your life. This is your choice. You make a decision. And that moment was a real wake up call because it was a moment in my life in which I had to make an adult decision at a very young age. And I couldn't have even imagined the impact or the implications of that decision. But because I decided to fight for myself when others had already dismissed me and given up on me, that was the day that changed my life because I made the decision on how I was going to move forward and how I was going to live my life and how I was going to direct it to move forward. And that taught me some early skills about fighting for myself.
All right, let's talk about your teacher, the one who
Yeah.
stepped in and said, boy, you can be more.
Well, it actually wasn't a teacher. It was actually my second 10th grade principal because I had
Okay.
failed the 10th grade the first time. And then I was introduced to Dr. Gwen Felder. And we did not get along because I wasn't in the time in my life that I wanted to hear anything that she had to say. But what she was doing is she was demonstrating that she cared and she was trying to help me realize that I had the capacity to do better than what I was doing. But I couldn't hear that because I wasn't ready to hear that. And our relationship didn't develop. But I remember during the school year, I'd be in the hallways, and then here comes Dr. Felder, and I'm like, oh Lord,
He
why
had a
did I have to
GPS
turn
tag
that
on you.
corner? Exactly, because she was everywhere I didn't want her to be. She wasn't like, well, actually, she was like American Express. She was everywhere I didn't want her to be because she was there. And she was always checking up on me. And even though I didn't like it was a moment of reflection and understanding that somebody was caring. And even though I didn't want her in my business, even though it was her business to make sure that I was getting a good education, I didn't want to hear it. But that relationship didn't fully develop because I was on the verge of failing 10th grade a second time and I changed schools. And so I lost contact with Dr. Felder. But I continued to move forward. You know, I went to another school and strategically changed schools, changed environment, started doing different things. And then I started to realize, hey, I am capable of doing this work. And that would have been good. But then you have these naysayers that are in your life. Because I had a counselor that told me, don't bother applying to college or going to any schools because you won't make it, you won't do well. Excuse me? Why would you say that to someone? So once I graduated from high school, and I barely graduated from high school because even on the day that I graduated, I did not know if I was going to be allowed to attend commencement activities. And so I ended up graduating 280 out of 303 students, the bottom 8% of my class with a 1.52 GPA. But I didn't want to listen to what they had to say because I knew I was capable of more. I just didn't know how to do it. So fortunately, I got a great job at Xerox right out of high school, and I was working with people who wanted to do better. And then at the same time, I was taking classes. So I took classes at one school and started to do well. Had another bad experience with an educator. Windshield wipers fell off my car, and I was deciding between getting to school, going to school on time and taking an exam, or replacing the windshield wipers to prevent it from cutting into my glass. I chose the latter, and I went to class to take the exam, and the professor said, "You're too late. you can't take the exam. I said, well, this is the reason. I have a receipt. My windshield wiper was falling off my car. Why can't I take the exam? It wasn't like I was choosing to skip. And she said, no. And I ended up failing the class, and that made me walk away. But about 6 months later, I went to another school, started taking classes. But given my track history, I shouldn't have been taking classes distance learning, which meant I needed to study independently. So I took a bunch of classes, didn't do well, had 2 semesters of a zero point 0.0 average. Part of that was because I withdrew from classes and I was ready to give up. But again, working with these people who were excelling, and the organization started an educational program with American University. And I said, well, if they're going to school to get their master's, why can't I get my bachelor's? So I went to the school and I happened to speak to a woman. And I told her very frankly, I have not been a good student, but I want to do well. How do I get in? And she said, you can't get in based on your grades, but if you take classes non-degree and prove that you can do the work, then after a couple of semesters, you can apply and you can potentially get in. And that was an opportunity of hope. And it was my chance to walk through the door myself. And so I took some classes non-degree, and then I ended up getting admitted to American University. Then I went on to the George Washington University to get my MBA. Again, I went in the back door because I couldn't get in the front door because I wasn't sure if I could get in. Took a couple of classes, non-degree, to prove that I could do the work. But towards the end of my MBA program, I almost got, well, actually, I did get academically dismissed 2 semesters from graduating with my MBA because I took this finance course that I wish I would have listened to that voice in my head. Because at the beginning of the semester, Dr. Soklas, rest your soul, I still remember you. He stood up in the front of the room, and there were 2 big blackboards. And he said, we're going to start the first half of the semester with our financial equation on this side, and we're going to end on the other side. So the equation is going to cover the entire board. I said, there is no way an equation could go from board to board. Oh boy, I was wrong.
Dan.
And I ended up passing this class with a C after a 4-hour exam. And what ended up happening was that C, because I was just trying to get the B grades, it dropped my GPA below a 3.0, which allowed me which caused me to be academically dismissed. And then I had to reapply for admission, ended up graduating, went back and got another master's degree. And then I had this wonderful opportunity to take classes during the pandemic because I said, you know what, coming out of the pandemic, I'm going to learn a language. But then I found out about this new doctoral program at Marymount University, and then I applied for the program and got in. And then as of May 2023, I completed my program. Well, and actually in March of 2023, I successfully defended my dissertation. In May of 2023, I got the honor of walking across the stage and graduating with a 4.0 GPA and also getting inducted into 2 honor societies. So with all that said, don't let somebody else's limitations be the definition of how you live or drive your life. Because had I listened to them, my life would have been a lot different. And as you mentioned earlier, I'm also an educator now, and I've been teaching college, university, and people who happen to be incarcerated since 2008. And it's one of my biggest passions in life is to give back because I strongly believe that each of us that makes it and does well has a responsibility, especially in minority communities, to reach back. And so, what I'm starting to promote now is mentoring is great, but just don't mentor one person if you made it. Try to mentor at least 5. And then imagine if those 5 turn around and mentor 5 more. Imagine the impact that we can have in our communities of color, but also in communities around the world to make a difference. So thanks to Dr. Gwen Felder for believing in me. But the one piece that I forgot to mention as I was talking about this story is that Dr. Gwen Felder is back in my life now. And she actually served on my doctoral committee. And unbelievably, she was the person who said, congratulations, Dr. Young.
I was
So
there.
dreams do come true.
Yes, yes. But you did have some rough patches along the way too. And that's one of the things that you also wanted to talk about, the almost suicide, the depression, fighting to understand who and where your place was in this world. And you talk about how your brother Johnny really stepped up for you at the time that you needed it. But talk about that, because there are people out here who may be hopeless. And you're an example of what happens when you get that hope rebuilt and believe in yourself.
Absolutely. But before we tell that story, we have to tell why the story began. Because I was working in Fortune 500 companies, working as a consultant. And most of the Fortune 500 companies that I worked with, the people were fairly ethical. But once I decided to go out as an independent consultant, I was working with people, including working as a consultant within the government. They were telling me to do things that were against my morals, my ethics, and my values. And I could have made a choice to just go along to get along and made a lot of money. But what I realized is that even if I choose to do it a little bit, it changes who I am and more importantly, who I want to be. Never could I have imagined that it would have led to the difficult times that I had, in which I couldn't find a job. I lost all of my savings. I was subpoenaed to go to court, to debtor's court, because I couldn't pay my bills. And I could endure all of those things, but to know that I would have to go in front of a court, which I didn't do because I chose not to, but just the thought of having to do it, for me, the question was, I did everything society told me to do to be a good person, to do the right thing. I was told by churches, my family, schools, organizations, everything they tell us to do, I did to not do the unethical things. But once I did, I wasn't protected. And that losing everything wasn't as bad as losing who I believed I was. And when you take away someone's spirit and their soul by beating them down and you don't give them opportunities because they've done the right things, but you think something else, and people can make up their own narratives, right or wrong. And it led to my soul breaking. And actually, at the time that I nearly ended my life, I did not plan it. And a lot of folks are like, well, how could this person just throw away their life? They seem so happy. How could I have missed this sign? Well, a lot of times we're smiling in front of you because we don't want to share. It's not something that we talk about. People are still, even though in this day and age we talk about mental health and the importance of it, people still aren't truly honest most of the time about their mental health. And for me, what happened was I went to sleep and I woke up and it was inside of me when my eyes opened. Because I opened my eyes probably around 10 o'clock, and within an hour, I was in this spiral that you're worthless, you're no good, you have no value, nobody wants you. And then in the middle of that storm, what I realized is I was worth more dead than alive because of my insurance. And I never understood that saying until that moment. But for me, I was a caregiver and I had my mother to take care of. And the last thing that I cared about was to know that my mother was going to be taken care of. So I called my brother Johnny, not to tell him that I was about to end my life or I was in the midst of a mental health spiral. I just wanted to hear him say that should something happen to me, that he would take care of mom. And that's all I wanted to hear. And I was ready to end my life. So I called him and I told him what I wanted to say. And I wanted to get off the phone really quickly, but I started to break down. And then he started asking questions. And then I hung up the phone. And then he kept calling, called all my numbers, trying to reach me. And reluctantly, I picked up the phone and spoke to him. And then we started talking, and he said to me, he said, Stacy, you write about all these positive things. Why don't you use your own words to save your life? And there was something in that moment that shook me back to reality. And he said, um, for me to contact one of our other siblings, our oldest sister, or I should say, our older sister. And I contacted her, and then the cavalry is starting to come in. And then I spoke to a good friend also that said, you're supposed to be at the jail today. You need to go. And so it was around 10 o'clock when I opened my eyes. Around 11 o'clock, I was in the middle of the storm. I contacted my brother somewhere within that next hour. And by 1 o'clock, um, I was fighting between life and death. And I had just heard a rhythmical chant in my head that was saying, do it, do it, do it, over and over again. And I was probably that close to ending my life. And for some reason, I was able to fight through that. And having the cavalry talk to me, and my friend encouraged me to go to the jail anyway, a few hours after I nearly ended my life. So I went to the jail to go teach some guys who were incarcerated, couldn't get in that day because they were on lockdown. That was the day that changed my life because being able to get up in that moment to go help someone else gave me a little bit of hope and said that I could add a little bit of value. And so, what I tell people when you're going through any type of storm, if you're feeling that you don't have any value or worth, go help somebody, anybody, because that will demonstrate that even in your lowest moments and your darkest days, you still have value and worth that you can give to somebody. And what I learned as I was coming out of my spiral is that there is always someone, somewhere who cares enough to give you a moment. And then afterwards, what I realized is that I had so many more people who loved me, who came in once they found out what was going on with me to make sure that I knew that I was loved, that I was valued, that I was worthy. And what I learned is no matter what I went through, I was still a good person. And on the other side now, what I've realized is that I never lost myself. And that was the most important thing. We fight for a lot of things in life, but so many lose themselves to others by being who they want you to be instead of being true to yourself. But one quote by Viktor Frankl, there's a book called Man's Search for Meaning, which I highly recommend. And one of the quotes that really stuck with me is, he who has a why to live can bear almost any how. So once I found my why, my how no longer mattered. And so now I'm living a life of service. And you don't need money to serve others and to live a positive life and to give others hope. Because during my darkest days, I gave others hope when I didn't even have my own light. And that energy that I put out into the world redefined me, my future, and my potentiality to continue to impact others positively. And so that's what I strive to do now. So if anybody's thinking about giving up, hold on one more day, fight one more day, talk to someone who really cares about you to let it out. And if you don't have somebody who you can talk to, because there's another thing that I use, another tool that I use, and I learned it at a leadership seminar. It's basically you write everything that you wanted to say to someone that maybe you don't have strength or it's not the time or the place to say it. Write it all out, get it out of your system, and then burn it.
Burning that bad out and bringing the good in, huh?
Absolutely.
Okay. Uh, let's talk about your organizations that you have started, especially Socrates. Talk about where that idea came from and how you moved forward, in a sense, so very quickly with that.
Well, so it was interesting because I knew that I wanted to give back. And The original organization's name was going to be SOCAR, which was Saving Our Children at Risk. And it evolved over time to Socrates, which is saving our communities at risk through educational services. And it's really a play on words because it represents my teaching style. Because I am a active learner and I like engagement, and I can better assess someone's knowledge by interacting with them versus giving them written material per se, or just giving them a written test. I like to have engagement because it also improves their communication, critical thinking skills, and their decision making real time. And so when I started the organization in December of 2013, I didn't know how I was going to move forward or how I wanted to get started. But one of the things that I said is, I'm not going to go after money. I want to build the concept and then the money will come. Because a lot of times people start organizations, they go out and get a lot of money and they haven't proved that they can do anything. So around the same time, I had started to write the first books in the It's a Crazy World, Learn From It series, which were inspirational quotes. And as I was sharing those with family and friends, several of them said, you need to take these quotes into the jail. And I'm like, you want me to take inspirational quotes into jail and speak to men about this? And they're like, absolutely. They need that encouragement more than you can ever imagine. So I ended up going into the Arlington County Detention Facility. And I was doing a tour that day, wasn't supposed to go into the unit that I was going to be teaching in. And the woman took me there and we went through a series of doors. And the next thing I know, I was on the inside with these guys. And I was like, whoa, this was not like watching it on Locked Up, right? So I took a couple of steps and then I looked because somebody said my name, like Stacy. And I'm like, who's calling me? Took couple more steps, then realized that this guy was someone who I used to run with in high school in my sophomore and junior year. And that was the moment that was a sign that that was where I was supposed to be. So long story short, I ended up teaching in the jail for many, many years up until the pandemic. That was my primary outreach. And then I also go out to schools and other community groups. And so that work was just passion driven because once you get in there and you start talking to these guys and understanding their stories and gals, because I did teach some women, but when you start understanding their stories and when they're sitting in your classes and you know that they want to do better, how can you not want to make a difference in their lives? And at first, my classes were just taught in a housing unit. And then I decided to move it down to one of the large rooms that they had. And that was done strategically because when I went into the housing unit, it was forced sessions, but I wanted them to use their energy. And so what I like to say is I like people to tee off, use their time, energy, and effort on fulfilling fantasies or otherwise dreams. So I wanted them to use their energy to come to me. Because if they use their energy to come to me, then they want it to be there and they could benefit from it. And so really working with these guys, they inspired me to want to do better, to want to do more. And collectively, we partnered to uplift each other. And it was an absolutely incredible experience. So that's what drove the development of my organization. And because of my mom and the pandemic, I put things on pause, but I'm getting ready to start up again. And then I also have my for-profit company, which is Beyond SPRH LLC. And that's basically a consulting organization and training organization in which I go into organizations and I deliver training on a variety of topics, whether it's dealing with workplace bullying or harassment, or developing communication, critical thinking skills, or customer service, just various areas. So everything that I do now is about education. And one thing, I just want to just throw this in because people often talk about everybody's born with a purpose, and it's our job to figure out what that is. Well, I know my purpose is to educate. But when I was writing my book, Above Expectations, what ended up happening was I remember that my mom had a happy news telegram from my first grade teacher. And I pulled it out of the album. And the amazing thing is that Mrs. Powell, still remember her name, she wrote in there, Stacy is my right arm. He helps the students who aren't as gifted. Well, even in the first grade, I was already an educator. And so I was meant to do the work that I'm doing. But sometimes we are afraid to make tough choices and we take the easy way out. But what I like to say, and I wrote this in an article that I wrote, it's called What If? What if I didn't make those tough decisions that I made? What if life isn't about making the easy decisions? What if life is about the tough decisions or the decisions that we're afraid to make? Are those the opportunities that drive the changes in our life for us to fulfill our future? I can tell you for me, the answer is absolutely yes. Because had I not made those tough decisions, went through the storms of living life on my terms, I wouldn't be Dr. Stacy L. Young today.
And your PhD is really geared to folks who learn kind of a different way. They aren't your normal walk down the aisle, I got a scholarship, I'll sit in the class type of people. You really focused on the unusual type of learners or the learners who need to find their path in a different way.
Absolutely. And so just to clarify, so I have a EDD, which is an educational doctorate, which is similar to a PhD. A PhD is more theoretical. My degree is more practical. And to your point, absolutely, because I was a non-traditional student. And non-traditional students are typically defined as individuals that are over the age of 24. They might have a family, they might have a full-time job. And through my research, I wanted to redefine that definition of a non-traditional student as, and really focusing on 18 and up, um, is someone who is taking care of themselves, who might have a full-time job. But that category of a non-traditional student wasn't typically studied because it was typically 18 to 22, 18 to 22 was defined as a traditional student. And then in a lot of literature, nobody even covered 23-year-olds. So I guess they were just out there on their own. So what I wanted to look at is the impact of student engagement on non-traditional students in a community college environment, and really applies to higher education as a whole, because this is a very unique student population that has very, very unique needs. And I should say specific, because they're at a point in their careers that they understand the value of education. They want it delivered in a certain way without all the fluff. And how do they figure out how do they apply what they're learning in the classroom to their profession or their professional goals? And so that's what I wanted to analyze and add my experiences as a former non-traditional student, but I wanted to understand the implications of the impact of student engagement and how we can better drive factors for their success, similar to I was able to figure out on my own. But I know that there's a way that we can do it on a repeatable basis to ensure that other people can do it too.
Yeah. As you look ahead, like you said, you're going back into the prisons, but you got some other educating to do. And are you working on a new book? Many different things. Catch me up.
Well, long story short, the world is my oyster now. And it's amazing the opportunities that come to you or come to one after you become doctor, because a lot of people want to hear what you have to say. And the thing that I'm being most careful of now is ensuring that I make the right choices for me, because every opportunity isn't a good opportunity. So I've had a
But isn't that in
over
life in general?
it
Every
is
opportunity is not necessarily a good opportunity because there have been jobs that I've worked for 2 weeks and I realized I didn't fit there.
right.
And I said, I know something else is coming along.
Yeah. And you got to know what's right for you and be strong enough to say, I need to walk away. And so I've spent over a decade struggling to learn who I am by choice, not by how somebody else wanted me to be. And I could have stayed in program management, managing multi-million dollar programs, making a lot of money. But that wouldn't have made me happy. So now my happiness, as I said earlier, is in service and in servitude. And so I'm really going to be focused on ways on educating individuals, sharing my experiential knowledge. And so that means going to colleges and talking to students and counselors and educators, talking to educators who are educating students from junior high to high school, and what will aid in some of the non-traditional students or the struggling students, or as I like to call them, opportunity students, to do well. And then there's more research that I want to do because I can't believe I'm saying this, but I have become excited about research and the opportunities to take the beginnings of what I did in my doctoral program and expand it even further because I developed my own conceptual model about student engagement and some of the factors of it. But during the limited confines of the time that I had to do my dissertation, I only covered part of it because one of the things that my great LDFM, Dr. Jessica Murata, taught me is the best dissertation is a done dissertation. So I sort of said, let's focus on the things that are necessary to get done. And then once it's done, I can go explore all these other options. So if anyone from the US Department of Education is watching, or anyone from the Justice Department is watching, or the White House, I'm available because I really want to share my experiential knowledge to drive changes, to impact lives in a positive ways, because everybody has a potential to be great. What that means is up to you. But there's a potential for greatness in all of us. And we just need to sometimes have somebody who can inspire us to make the change, to make a positive impact on our own lives and others.
I say finding the key that unlocks the door for you
Absolutely.
to walk through. And again, if the door
Absolutely.
is open, are you ready to walk through? And this is how you prepare people for that unlocking and to walk through.
But I want to piggyback on that point for a moment, Maggie, because you are a wonderful person. You're a great soul who opens the doors for others. Because there were a lot of people that didn't want to open the door for me with someone who did not have radio experience, didn't want to necessarily hear the story about mental health. Isn't it amazing how times have changed now?
You were way
But
ahead of your time.
you know, but you opened that door for me, which not only gave me access to a wider audience that led to me connecting with a lot of great people, but it strengthened my ability to tell my story and connect with others who needed to hear it, the raw, unpolished version of it. And because of your ability to open doors for me and so many others, what I have learned to do is to have tough conversations in rooms filled with people who might not want to hear it, but you deliver it in a way in which the message is palatable. And so those are some of the lessons that I learned from you and listening to your show and the great work that you do because you're a great communicator, you're a great person, you're a great spirit, you're a great friend, and someone I love greatly. So
Same here.
thank you. You do.
Oh, listen, it is truly my pleasure. I'm so glad I opened the door for you because it has become a long time friendship. What is it, almost 20 years?
It's been a while and it's a
It's
very dear
Yeah,
friendship,
yeah,
right?
and made it very special because I love seeing your growth and at times you were a long time caregiver for your mom too, and seeing the highs and lows of your path has made it so much more joy for me when you received your EDD. Let me correct that. And being there that day with Dr. Felder and so many other people, including your brother Johnny, we were all there in your corner. And you're articulate, you're caring, and I wish you nothing but the best and blessings always.
Well, thank you. And one other thing that I want to say, because this is another message that I want to get out there now, because So many people are seeing what's on social media and seeing that everything is good and you might not be as good as this person when everybody is putting out there this facade. Not everybody, but a lot of people are putting out there this facade. And one of the things that I learned earlier was that, let's say if we're looking at somebody, we're thinking that that's what we see. Well, someone taught me years ago, if you stick a pin through that, you'll see that a lot of people, they're just giving you show. And one of the things that helped me on my journey was being honest about all the things, the highs and the lows. And that will make you whole versus trying to keep up with the Joneses, because that's not your job. And that's the one thing, Maggie, that you do, is that you bring people together to collaborate and to elevate to the next level. So thank you.
Oh, truly my pleasure. Well, listen, I'm going to wrap it up, but I can't thank you enough. And, we still got to go out to dinner and have a drink.
Oh, of course,
So,
of course.
because it's coming soon, the true celebration, because you and I both have been so busy this early spring, but it's coming. And I promise you, it is coming.
Yes. Well, thank you for everything. And as you say, the best is yet to come because
Yeah.
this is the season to elevate. That's my word for 2023.
All right. Thank you. Once again, many thanks to my friend, Dr. Stacy L. Young. Learn more about his many works at his websites, slyoung.com. Once again, that's the main one, slyoung.com, socrates.org, and beyond, sprh.com. Until next time, continue to seek peace and spread lots of love. I'm Maggie Linton.